G'day, how you all going? Today I want to talk about a concept in Judaism called two powers in heaven. And it is from this book, Two Powers in Heaven. It's written by Alan Segal. He is uh, a rabbinic scholar, so he understands all the rabbinic writings and he does a lot of things like that. So this text I want to talk about with the two powers in heaven comes from Genesis. Well, it'll be Genesis 18 and Genesis 19. But to get the backstory, I want to go back to Genesis chapter 18. And we'll start here at verse 1. So in Genesis 18, verse 1, this is what it says. And Yahweh appeared to him, which is Abraham, by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. And then Abraham lifted up his eyes and he looked, and behold, there was 3 men standing in front of Abraham. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth. Now, in verse 1, it says, Yahweh appeared to Abraham. In verse 2, Abraham lifts his eyes up and sees 3 men standing before him. So there's 3 men standing before him, and one of them is Yahweh. According to the text that Moses penned, Yahweh appeared to Abraham. In verse 3, Abraham said, O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree, while I bring morsel and bread, that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass by. Hang on a second. There we are. And verse 9. And they said to him, Where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, She's in a tent. And then Yahweh said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent behind the door. And then Sarah obviously laughed. If you know this story, you will understand these concepts. So Sarah laughed and said, How can I have a son because I'm old? And verse 14, Yahweh said, so one of these 3 people is being referred to as Yahweh, as the Lord. And Yahweh said, Is anything too hard for Yahweh? Is there anything too hard for Yahweh? And at the appointed time, I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. Now, and Sarah shall have a son. So this is a interaction with Yahweh, who is on earth, incarnate in the form of a man, speaking to Abraham. Okay, and he's saying to Abraham that you are going to have a son. I will multiply your offsprings, which will later be told, and which has been told before, which Yahweh does. But listen to this interaction in John chapter 8. In John chapter 8, verse 39, the Jews answered Jesus and said, Abraham is our father. And Jesus said to them, If you were Abraham's children, you would be doing the works Abraham did. Verse 40, but now you seek to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. This is not what Abraham did. So these Jews that are standing before Jesus are being contrast with what Abraham did and what they are trying to do. Those Jews before Jesus are trying to kill Abraham. And Jesus says that Abraham did not try to do this. What did Abraham not try to do? Well, Abraham didn't try to kill Jesus. Now, the Jews understood this because they go on later on and say, How can you say that you've seen Abraham? You're not yet 50 years old. But look what they're saying. They're saying Abraham is our children, is our father. Jesus says, if Abraham was your father, you would be doing the works Abraham did. But you were trying to kill me. Now, what did Abraham do when he met Yahweh, who was in the flesh, in the form of a man? In Genesis 18, verse 4. A little water he brought to Yahweh in the flesh, which is the Word incarnate, and wash your feet. Rest yourselves under the tree, and I'll bring you morsel and bread. So Yahweh incarnate, who is the Word incarnate, the Word made flesh, who is Jesus Christ, condescended in Genesis 18 and appeared before Abraham in the form of a man. And Abraham served Jesus, the pre-incarnate Christ, the Christological appearing of Christ in the Old Testament. So those Jews that Jesus was talking to tried to kill Jesus, not serve Jesus. Abraham served Jesus. Abraham didn't try to kill Jesus. And John 8. So this is what I said before. So John 8 verse 56. Your father Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day, and he saw it and was glad. So Jesus is saying that Abraham has seen Jesus' day and was glad. And verse 57, this is what the Jews say. So the Jews said, you are not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham? The Jews understood what Jesus was saying, that Jesus was claiming that Abraham saw Jesus. In verse 58, Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. So in John chapter 8, Jesus is demonstrating that he has seen Abraham, and if those Jews were really the children of Abraham and the children of God, they would be doing the works that Abraham did. But they weren't doing it because they were trying to kill Jesus. And Abraham, when Abraham saw Jesus, pre-incarnate Christ, the Yahweh in flesh in Genesis 18, when Abraham saw that person, Abraham did not try to kill Jesus, did not try to kill Yahweh, but Abraham served him. And this is not what the Jews were doing. So Genesis 18, going back to 18, verse 16. So you remember in chapter 2, how Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw that there was 3 men standing before him, 3 persons, and one of them was Yahweh. Verse 1 says Yahweh appeared to Abraham. So verse 16, then the men set out from there, and they looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them and set them on their way. Yahweh said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Verse 18, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. So the men turned from there and went towards Sodom, but Abraham still stood before Yahweh. So the people, let's just go back. So we see in verse 1 and 2, Yahweh appeared before Abraham. And then Abraham lifted up his eyes and he saw 3 men standing in front of him. So 3 men were standing in front of Abraham, and one of them was Yahweh. And we'll just keep going. So the men turned from there and went towards Sodom, but Abraham still stood before Yahweh. So some men, plural, it's a plural, went down to Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham still stood before Yahweh. Then Abraham drew near and said, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Verse 25, far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? This person who appeared to Abraham recognizes that this person in the flesh, who is called Yahweh by the author of Genesis, Abraham recognizes this person to be the judge of all the earth. Now, in the New Testament, who is the judge of all the earth? The one who judges all the earth is Christ, is Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ came first, not to judge, but to save. But he will be coming a second time, and he will judge the world of its sins. We will all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Jesus is the judge of all the earth. Verse 26, and Yahweh said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake. And then Abraham and Yahweh have a back and forth. So it goes from 50, 45, 30, 40, 30, all the way down to 10. And verse 33, and Yahweh went his way, and when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. So Yahweh went his way. Yahweh went down to Sodom and Gomorrah to see if what he had heard was true. What can we understand from this chapter? 3 men came to Abraham. One of them was Yahweh. Yahweh appeared in the flesh, had his feet washed, ate and drank. Yahweh promised Sarah would conceive. Abraham identified this person who came in the flesh as the judge of all the earth. And the judge of all the earth is Christ. We will all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. And 2 of them departed for Sodom and Gomorrah. And Yahweh stayed behind and spoke with Abraham, kept on speaking with Abraham and had negotiations with Abraham. Then we get to Genesis chapter 19, verse 1. 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening. Lot was sitting in the gates of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose up to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth. And then Genesis 18. And Yahweh, so back in Genesis 18, Yahweh appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre. So that's back in Genesis 18. He lifted up his eyes and he looked, and behold, there were 3 men standing before him. And then in verse 22, it says that the men turned from there and went towards Sodom and Gomorrah. But Abraham still stood before Yahweh. So that is all in Genesis 18. The first verse of Genesis 19 is 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening. So the men here in verse 22 was 2 of them, as explained in the first verse of chapter 19. So 2 men turned from there and went down to Sodom and Gomorrah. But Abraham still stood before Yahweh. 2 of them left, 1 of them stayed. 2 of them are called angels, are recognized as angels, and 1 of them is recognized as Yahweh. I hope you can understand that concept of this exegetical framework of who the 3 men were that appeared before Abraham. 1 of them was Yahweh, the other 2 were angels, according to Genesis chapter 19, verse 1. Genesis 19, verse 8. But the men of Sodom said, stand back. Then they pressed hard against Lot and drew near to break the door down. So they tried to get in to take hold of the 2 angels that visited Lot in Sodom and Gomorrah. Verse 10. But the men, in this context, is the 2 angels that arrived, reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. Verse 11. And they, the angels, so the angels struck with blindness men who were at the entrance of the house, both small, great, so they wore themselves out, groping at the door. So these 2 angels were not mere men. They were not just regular men. They had the power to reach out their hands and strike people down with blindness. They are probably heavenly beings that had this power to do this within themselves. And Abraham and Lot is starting to recognize that these men who have appeared to him, they aren't just regular men. Verse 23. The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. And this is the important part of Genesis chapter 19, is verse 24. Then Yahweh rained down on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from Yahweh out of heaven. So Yahweh rained down on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from Yahweh in heaven. Yahweh on earth rains down fire and brimstone from Yahweh in heaven. There's two distinct Yahwehs here. Verse 25, and he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the city, that they grew and what grew on the ground. So everything was destroyed. Now, who is the two Yahwehs? One was present on the earth and the other was in heaven. Yahweh on earth was in the form of a man, was incarnate, condescension in the form of a man. He was with and spoke with Abraham. And this Yahweh on the earth, who was in the form of a man, rained down fire and brimstone from Yahweh in heaven. Both of those words, Lord, in Genesis chapter 24, is the divine name of God, Yahweh, the tetragrammatic word. So this is what we see in Genesis 18 and Genesis 19. Now, this is known as the two powers in heaven in Jewish tradition. Hold on 1 second. So this is known as the two powers in heaven in the Jewish tradition. Now, I want to show you this book. So this book is written by a rabbinic Jew. So Alan Segal is not a Christian. He does not believe that Christ is God, but he recognizes what the ancient Jews were talking about and how they understood the two powers. So this is an understanding that Segal had come to, right? The two powers in heaven. 25 years ago, rabbinical scholar Alan Segal produced what is still a major work on the idea of two powers in heaven in Jewish thought. Segal argued that the two powers idea was not deemed heretical in Jewish theology until the 2nd century CE. So Alan Segal recognizes that this two Yahwehs, these two powers that are in heaven, that have a throne, that has two thrones in heaven, this was not heretical theology in the Jewish tradition, but it became heretical in the 2nd century, AD. Now, why do you think it became heretical in the 2nd century AD? Because the Christians then had this concept in their theological system of the Trinity. They interpreted Genesis 19 as Jesus Christ on earth, pre-incarnate Christ, raining down fire and brimstone from the Father in heaven, from God in heaven, from Yahweh in heaven. So before the 2nd century AD, this was not considered heretical. Jews believed this up until the 2nd century AD. He carefully traced the roots of the teaching back BC. So these teachings, these roots, were all the way back 200 years before Jesus Christ existed, before Jesus Christ became incarnate in flesh. So these two powers in heaven was believed in Jewish tradition well before Jesus Christ walked this earth. And it was even believed up until the 2nd century AD. The only reason why they scrubbed it out of the history books, so to speak, is because it was given credence to the understanding or the concept of the Trinity in Christian thought, in Christian theology. So they scrubbed out these two powers of heaven. And whoever believed this, they had to recant it and say that they don't believe it. Further note, right, you do not see from the 2nd century, you do not see no rabbinical Jews writing anything about the word of the Lord, about the word of the Lord, because that back then, in the two powers situation, the incarnate Christ, the incarnate Yahweh who appeared to man on earth, that incarnate Yahweh was referred to as the word of the Lord, as the memra of the Lord. You see this through a lot of the Targum materials. So that the Targums, they are commentary on the Old Testament scriptures, but they are written in Aramaic. So when they got taken into captivity, a lot of people lost the ability to speak in Hebrew. So these Targums were translated into Aramaic so that they still had the foundations of the Old Testament. And the word of the Lord stopped being used after Christ came and after Christians picked up this word of the Lord as you find in John chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God, and the word was God. So the Jews in the 2nd century avoided using the word associated with Christian theology, with the Trinity. So again, Alan Segal, Second Temple area, 200 BC, 200 years before Christ. Siegel was able to establish that the ideas antecedents were in the Hebrew Bible, specifically passages like Daniel 7:9. Again, Daniel, in the book of Daniel, it talks about the Ancient of Days riding on the clouds, and then the one who is in the image of, who is in the likeness of the Son of Man, and there is two thrones set up, one for the Ancient of Days and the other for the Son of Man. And the Son of Man rides on the clouds of heaven. So Alan Segal looked at this imagery, and he understood that the ancient Jews viewed this imagery as two Yahwehs in heaven, two Yahwehs on thrones, not two gods. They were still monotheists, so there was one God, but two persons, two Yahweh persons. In Christianity, and also in the Targums, in the commentary of the Aramaic commentary of the Old Testament that is also written before Jesus Christ existed on the earth, they identify the Father as Yahweh, they identify the word of the Lord as Yahweh, and they identify the glory of the Lord or the Spirit of the Lord as Yahweh, especially in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27 to 28, when it says that let us make man in our image. The Targums give a commentary on what that means, and it is Yahweh, the word of Yahweh, and the Spirit of Yahweh. That is what the Targums describe as us. Let us make man in our image. But let's keep on going. So, like, Segal identified the Hebrew Bible as the source, with passages such as Daniel 7, Exodus 23, 20 to 23, where in that chapter, in that passage of scripture, Moses is speaking to Yahweh. right? And then Yahweh says to Moses, go over here to this mountain and Yahweh will meet you there. So Moses is speaking to Yahweh, and then
Why do you go to the donkey castle?
later, mate, out please. So Moses is speaking to Yahweh, and then Yahweh says to Moses, go over to this place and Yahweh will meet you there. However, he was unable to discern any coherent religious framework from which these passages and others were conceptually derived. Persian dualism was unacceptable as an explanation since neither of the two powers in heaven were evil. So that is a significant point. Segal recognizes that these two powers in heaven, none of them were evil, but they were both good. Segal speculated that the divine warrior imagery of the broader ancient Near East likely had some relationship, but they were one in unity. So this is like an excerpt of what Segal was pointing to in the two powers of heaven. And realize that Segal is not a Christian. He is a Jew, but he understands and he realizes that the ancient Jews believed in a plurality of persons in the Godhead. It was not a uni person. It was a plural. It was a person in plurality. So yeah, that is what is meant by the two powers in heaven in Jewish tradition. Give me 1 second. That describes what the two powers are. But 24, do we see this? Testament. I don't know if there is an issue with my internet, but it looks like. So, and Gomorrah was destroyed by Yahweh on earth and Yahweh in heaven. Let's check those out. Now, you must understand the context of Isaiah 13, right? The person who is speaking is Yahweh, is the Lord. It is, we are told in the context of Isaiah 13, the one who is speaking is Yahweh. Okay, so this is what it says in verse 11. Yahweh will punish the world for its evil. Again, the judge of all the earth, as was explained in Genesis chapter 19. The person who came to Abraham was the judge of all the earth. In verse 11, I will punish the world for its evil. A judge punishes evil. And I will put an end to the pomp of the arrogant. I will make people more rare than fine gold. I will make the heavens tremble. This can't be a person. How can a man make the earth tremble? How can a man make people rarer than fine gold? Verse 17, I am stirring up the Medes against them, against the Jews, who have no regard for silver and no delight in gold. Their bows will slaughter the young men, and they will have no mercy on the fruit of the womb. Their eyes will not pity children. So this is what God is going to do in the Medes against the Israelites. In verse 19, and Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the splendor and the pomp when God One who is speaking is Yahweh. Yahweh is speaking. So Yahweh is speaking of Yahweh in the third person. So that is one instance of the recount of this, of what happened. I don't know what. Jeremiah chapter 50, start at verse 33. Now, this is just to show you who is speaking is not Jeremiah, but this is the words of Yahweh. Thus says Yahweh of hosts. Okay, Yahweh is speaking, verse 35. And a sword against the Chaldeans declares Yahweh. So this is Yahweh's words. Therefore, wild beasts shall dwell with hyenas in Babylon. The ostrich shall dwell in her. She shall never again have people, nor be inhabited for all generations. Verse 40. This is still Yahweh speaking. As when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah and their neighboring cities, declares Yahweh. Yahweh says when God points back to a point in time where God rained down fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah. So here we see Yahweh is speaking again of an action that God has done in the past. And if you remember back in Genesis 19:24, it was Yahweh in heaven, Yahweh in flesh upon the heaven. He rained down fire and brimstone from Yahweh that was in earth. Yahweh that was in the heavens. I just screwed up that saying. So Yahweh on earth rained down fire and brimstone from Yahweh in heaven. So Yahweh in heaven was the one who rained it down. But Yahweh on earth was the one who called it down from heaven. So here, Yahweh on earth is declaring when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah and their neighboring cities. Now, the last one is Amos chapter 4, verse 10. Now, notice the pronouns here. I sent among you pestilence after the manner of Egypt. Who done that? Who sent pestilence in Egypt? It was Yahweh. It was the angel of the Lord in Exodus chapter 3, who is identified as Yahweh. He sent the pestilence in Egypt. I killed your young men with the sword. I'm still speaking. I overthrew some of you as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah, pointing back to the time when God rained down, who was calling Yahweh in heaven to rain down. Ram plucked from out of the burning, yet you did not return to me, declares Yahweh. So your God, O Israel. Again, Yahweh is speaking about God and of Yahweh God. And you can see that in the other two passages. So that or Orthodox Jew. He is a rabbinical Jew. He does not believe in the deity of Christ. Yet he understands the Old Testament teachings of multiple people, multiple persons identified as Yahweh. And they even interact with each other. They have conversations with each other. These are truly two persons, but one God. Because in Deuteronomy it says that the Lord your God, the Lord is one. The Shema, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Now, what's fascinating about that text itself, it says, Shema Israel, Elohino, Shema Israel, Yahweh Elohimo, Yahweh Ikad. Right? It uses the name of God 3 times in that passage, but then it says it's one. It's 3, but it's one. You know, it's just a fascinating little, little nuggets that you get in Scripture. But also, right, God is 3 persons, but God is one. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that's a contradiction. How could God be 3 persons but be one? And they will point back to Deuteronomy, the Shema. But they don't understand when they use Ikad as a unit of measure, that Ikad is not exclusively used as a unit of measure. It can be, but it's not. It can be used as a unity of purpose. For example, let me give you this example. In Genesis, it says that so what was I saying? So Ikad, right, does not always mean one in units, one as a unit of measure. For example, in Genesis, when it says that a husband shall leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife, and those 2 flesh shall be one, shall be Ikad, one. And this is also reiterated with Jesus. But in Genesis 1, I'll get it up and I'll show you. Yeah, I should have maybe prepared this, but not to worry. Okay. Okay. Let me just share this. Okay, so this is Genesis chapter 2. 22. Okay, I hope you can see that. Okay, here, verse 24. It says, therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Okay, so a husband shall leave his mother and father, and the 2 flesh shall become one flesh. Ikad. That word one means ikad. Now, that's not a unit of measure. They don't morph into one flesh. They don't become like a transformer and two people are morphed into one flesh. No, but they are one in unity. So when it says that, hear, Israel, your Lord, your God, your Lord is one. Now, first off, why would Moses have to specify that the Lord is one? Let me get rid of this. So if you think about it, why does Moses have to specify that the Lord, that Yahweh is one? Well, in Genesis, you see a plurality within the Godhead, within Yahweh in Genesis. You see that same plurality within the Godhead in Exodus. So once you have this plurality, it would be very easy for those Jews who came out of Israel and the new generation that are going into the promised land can look at these scriptures and be like, okay, it's saying that there's two Yahwehs. So is there two gods? But no, Moses says that Yahweh is one. He's one God in essence, but he's got a plurality in persons. So I hope you sort of can understand, but there's many places like this where Ikad, one, does not mean a single unit of measure, but a plurality. So Yahweh is one in his essence, but he's a plurality in persons. Same with marriage, that a husband will marry his wife and they will become one flesh. Now, are they one flesh? Two different fleshes, but they become one in unity, one in thought, one in purpose. It's the same thing with Yahweh. Now, Yahweh is one essence, but in three persons. Now, if I could truly explain to you what Yahweh is, then let's put it this way. In Exodus chapter 3, when Moses says to God, who are you, or what are you? What does God say to Moses? I am that I am. Esha, Asha, Ehya, Asha, Ehya. Right? I am that I am. Now, did God know what or who he was? Of course. Of course, God knows what and who he is. But God cannot explain it where we would have sufficient understanding to what God is. Our cognitive abilities will not allow us to comprehend exactly and explain exactly what God is. God is far beyond us. There's nothing in heaven, there's nothing in earth that can be like unto God, that can be likened unto God. God can't point at something in all creation and say, you see that, Moses? I'm like that. God can't do that. God is outside of this creation. The universe. We have one universe, right? Within this universe, we have matter, we have space, and we have time. These three things makes the universe. These three things is what the universe is, but we still have one universe. Now that's still not what God is like, okay? Because there's nothing on earth that can describe what God is. I hope that's understanding, and I hope this is beneficial to you. And if anyone wanted to jump in and have a conversation, I did put a link there. You were free to do so, but I guess no one wanted to jump in. Anyway, thank you guys for your time. I hope you guys understand the concept of the two powers in heaven and how it can relate to Genesis chapter 19. Genesis chapter 19 is an exclusive text that says, it is very explicit that it says that there was one Yahweh on earth who was in the flesh, who spoke with Moses, who spoke with Abraham, and he rained down fire and brimstone from another person who was Yahweh in heaven. Two Yahwehs being spoken of, two persons of Yahweh's. But Moses says that Yahweh is one. All right, Yahweh is one. I hope you guys enjoyed this content and helped you guys out. But yeah, until another video, peace of the love of Jesus Christ be with you all. Peace.